So thanks everyone. So today's coffee chat, we are going to talk about using rubrics to engage our students in learning. It is a coffee chat designed to allow all of us to have a conversation together. It's more informal. We are still going to talk about the teaching and learning and research and share some templates and obviously some ideas, but it's going to be a little more informal in the fact that I encourage everybody to open up the microphones and ask questions of each other. The rest of the time together is by no means meant for me to lead the conversation as much as it is for everybody to engage in one together. But I will begin this afternoon, just by going over a little bit about what, again, the coffee chat idea is. Melody is going to be moderating today. She is going to take some time to check out the chat, so feel free to chat with each other as you will, and she can answer questions if you do post them on chat. So she is your personal concierge. I will be facilitating the conversation, but more on the side of timing and making sure that everybody can see and hear, and that the PowerPoint moves smoothly. But you, as the participants, you really are. You're important. You are going to be engaging each other in conversation, because this really is in the form of a community of practice. So we want that fluid conversation, that equal voice. And as I've mentioned before, we need to keep in mind that within a community of practice, we are mutually responsible for each other's learning. And that means that we share experiences because we can all learn from them. And so today, when we talk about rubrics, share your questions, share your concerns, the good, the bad, the ugly. If you've used a rubric, you like it, talk about it. If you've used a rubric, you didn't like it, talk about it. It's okay to not know everything about rubrics. I certainly don't, but I am a fan, as I've mentioned before. So let's get started with what we're going to talk about today. Essentially, we're going to this is part one, so we're just going to skim the surface a little bit about those essential components of high quality rubrics, just a tiny bit. And we're going to talk about the basic types of rubrics, and that's in terms of the formality. Everything else is going to come in the form of a conversation, and I'm really excited today to engage all of you and to learn from all of you about how you use rubrics, or how you'd like to use rubrics in your classrooms. We're going to start, however, with the Great American Chocolate Chip Cookie Test. And I like to use this test in a way to share my why behind using rubrics in the classroom. I love chocolate chip cookies, and my family loves chocolate chip cookies. And I want the world to love chocolate chip cookies. So let's say I create this chocolate chip cookie test here at Quincy College. And I test all of you. I test our entire college community on the perfect way to create a chocolate chip cookie. And I send out this list of directions, and it's just like, bake the cookie and put the stuff together, bake the cookie, bring it in, and we're going to judge the quality of your cookie. And I send that out to everybody, and that's all you have to go on. And so you come in and you bring your cookies in with you, and Melody and I try your cookies, and we just give you a score. That's it. Now think of the other scenario where I send out an email, I tell everyone about this Great American Chocolate Chip Cookie Test that we're going to have right here at the college. And I actually give you a rubric. And I tell you exactly what the chocolate chip cookie needs to look like, what those qualities of a well-baked chocolate chip cookie really are. And I send this along. And I tell you, we're going to be judging the quality of your cookie based on this criteria, these critical elements. And so we tell you, we're going to focus on the chocolate chips. We're going to focus on the shape and the size, and we're going to focus on the texture of your cookies. And we break it down into the critical elements that you see here with all of these proficiency levels. And this gives you much more information to go on when you're actually creating the cookies. If you want exemplary, and you probably would, you're going to make sure that you're using those dark chocolate chunks and that you have enough within each cookie so that every time there's a bite taken, there's a substantial amount of chocolate. And that you're going to make sure that they're shaped into equal sizes. And you're going to make sure that when you bring them in, they're still warm. And I always like a tiny bit of sea salt. And this gives you a lot more to go on. And this is the way I like to formulate my why behind using a rubric. Because from my perspective, and I'm interested in hearing yours, when we tell students exactly what they should expect, when we eliminate all of the questions, and when we just allow them to focus on what we determine to be the critical elements of the assessment or the assignment, then they are able to focus and make decisions based on those critical elements that we've laid out for them. So when we're looking at rubrics overall, we typically look at two different rubric families, the holistic family and the analytical family. A holistic rubric really focuses on larger and more enduring outcomes, meaning that you're looking at a critical element or an indicator for success, if you will, that captures the entire course, let's say. It's more of a capstone level. It captures maybe several units worth of work. It could capture a month worth of work. The analytical, as you can see, is unpacked for a greater measurability. So with an analytical rubric, we're really looking at those critical elements, such as we did here, those critical elements, and we break them down into those digestible proficiency levels so that we literally can see a more concrete dimension within the expectation. So we have the holistic, larger, more enduring, and then we have those analytical rubrics that break it down. Both rubric types allow us to provide feedback. For both types of rubrics, we're looking at a guide to success for the students. And I like to think of the way I use rubrics in my classrooms, whether again I'm using a holistic approach or an analytical approach. I like to think of it as the GPS. And I think of it also in terms of a target when I look at my proficiency level. So that GPS, those critical elements that I create for my students, allow all of the students to get to the end result. However, I guide them a little bit because in terms of the GPS idea, I think of the fact that I know where the fastest route may be. I know where there may be substantial potholes or lots of street lights or stop signs. And I also know where the easier route may be for students. And I can take them there, much like a GPS would. And I can also give them that proficiency level to help them target. And along with the holistic and the analytical rubric and these concepts, there are also multiple ways that we can use a rubric as a tool for evaluation and as a tool for instruction. So this is an example of a holistic rubric, and we're just going to go back to that chocolate chip cookie test example. So you see here, holistically, the design looks different. There's a yes and a no for those possible indicators. And you see that the possible indicators I have here as examples are very broad. Baked chocolate chip cookies with quality ingredients at the optimal temperature and time. That's very broad, so I didn't analyze it in granular chunks. Displayed chocolate chip cookies in a way to highlight the quality of the cookies. Again, more holistic, more broad, more enduring. And then going back to then going back to the analytical one, the analytical rubric, well, that again is much more granular, you see here with the chocolate chip cookies. Both types of rubrics have a place in our on-campus and online classrooms. And I'm sure that you've used various rubrics that fall under both categories. So now the question becomes, how have we used rubrics in our classrooms? What questions do we have about using these rubrics? And what successes have we had? And what challenges have we had? So I'm going to step back now, and I'm going to just allow you folks to have a conversation together about, the connections that you've made between holistic and analytical rubrics. And, if you want to throw in your favorite chocolate chip cookie type, that's fine too. All right, so I've already talked too much.
So did you bring cookies?
I didn't, but I did not. But I will try to when you're all on campus again, if you want to stop by the hub.
Yeah, I've always felt my rubrics were a bit of a mix between the holistic and the specific. So there's specific goals, but then you kind of break it down into, there's a holistic goal, but then you kind of break that down into specifics, 2 different degrees depending on what you're trying to find out, or at least have the students do. Well, that's my contribution.
This is Megan. So I always use rubrics on my on-campus classes, and mostly for my larger assignments. So I do a lot of PowerPoints, I do a lot of presentations, I do a lot of research papers in all of my classes. So I was already using rubrics quite a bit for those larger assignments. When we went all online, I had started teaching online before we went completely online. One of my goals was to start creating and using rubrics for pretty much every assignment that I posted on Canvas, including all discussion posts. I met with Lisa a little bit before I did this. I also met with Amanda Colligan and kind of talked with them a little bit. I did a lot of research online, which actually was more overwhelming than helpful, to be completely honest. And I think sometimes I tend to overthink things. I've realized in creating my rubrics, I think I might be trying to fit too much in for each rubric. I definitely do more analytical rubrics. I like to have the criteria elements. I like to have a little explanation as to what each level looks like. Also, looking at the example that Lisa just gave us, I think sometimes I try to fit in too many levels. Instead of having, she has kind of like a 4-point, a 0 to 3 type of idea. I think I have a harder time figuring out what each one of those levels should look like. I also struggle with, I love to physically write on things. And I'm having trouble now that everything's in Canvas, being able to do, I still make comments in the comment section, a lot of comments, maybe too many. But I like physically writing on pieces of paper, presenting that to my students, meeting with my students. So those are some of the struggles I'm going through. I don't know if anybody has any advice for me or some support or help or similarities that they're dealing with.
I also miss having the plain old whiteboard. I felt very comfortable expressing my ideas with the marker on the whiteboard. I have been kind of reverting to Notepad. It's pretty a lot of typing, spacing things around, but so I'm trying to get faster in expressing my ideas textually with Notepad in the way that I would even to some extent with quick character-based diagramming, even a little bit, But
You're using Notepad a lot.
What I'm saying is those times where I feel the urge, I would be whiteboard explaining this. That's my go-to tool at this point. Yeah.
Jimmy, can you talk a little bit about what that is? I don't know if everybody knows.
Oh, well, Notepad, Notepad on your window. If you have a Windows machine, I think most the college issues us all Windows laptops. So if you say start and then Notepad, it brings up a little text editor. It's a scaled down Microsoft Word, right? It's just a simple text editor.
But you can't draw pictures with it. You can just write.
Well, no, actually, Dave, interestingly, in my background, working with internet standards, they're all text-based, and you can do diagramming with characters, so it can be done. It takes a little practice and a little work.
Is this the old school way of using like letters and the ASCII characters?
ASCII characters. It's all ASCII characters. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's old. It is old school.
It's very old school. Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah.
And just building off of this a little bit, in Canvas, you are able to create rubrics that provide a section for you to add feedback. And when we meet next week, part 2 of our coffee chat on rubrics will allow us to dig in a little bit deeper about more of a variety of ways of using rubrics for students and really giving them and putting them in the students' hands. In addition to that, we're going to show you step by step how to go ahead and create the different types of rubrics and putting in that feedback part, which is super important. I agree with Jim and Megan. I love the feedback. I've used the in both Blackboard and D2L and Canvas, annotating and adding that feedback right on the document for students, and then overall providing some feedback right in the rubric. More generalized feedback, but you can't give enough feedback. It just helps them. Jim?
Yeah, another tool is if you use PowerPoint. PowerPoint has well, actually, now that I think of it, I take it back. I have a quick philosophical question for you, though, about the pluses and minuses of using rubrics. And I think back to when I was a student, and when a lot of the classes I had, the challenge was really, what is the teacher looking for, right? What is the teacher going to answer? And I found the mystery in that drove me to learn more, that I had to study the whole breadth of knowledge, right? And so I wonder how there could be a drawback in over-reliance on presenting rubrics for all that we do, because we're kind of channeling them just to small pieces of what we're trying to, if we're teaching a very broad topic. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
If I can add to that, sometimes having the students solve some general problem, they have to work out the details, that can be a feature and not a bug.
I think it's very organic, actually, solving problems. I think that's why ultimately I will defend the word understand, because you're talking about something that is so synergistic that it can't be divided into parts on a rubric. So you can do it a little bit to sort of justify your grading. Of course, like, I have steps and problems. Did you write down the initial pictures correctly? Did you have the right functions correctly written? And then calculation for, let's say, 5 points to 10. But, you could break that down infinitely, and then you could question, the stipulations within the stipulations within the stipulations of the rubric. So at some point, it's too much, and you have to let the professor be the judge. In other words, there's no way to generalize completely grading on problems and exams, unless you just make it multiple choice. And then, of course, you're not even looking at the steps of a problem. You're just focusing on the answer, which, is the least interesting part of a math problem, or at least a word problem. So I think I'm with Jim on this. There's something that is lost when we try to particularize and discretize something that is a synergistic whole, when we look at a problem. And, it can cause a lot of also emails, right? Didn't I get 7 out of 10 points because I met these rubrics? And I'll say, well, you didn't exactly get the third one correct. And so, in other words, yeah, I think there's a, when you're struggling to be complete and organic, breaking it down, it's just like dancing. If you teach someone how to dance, like the tango or something, if you break it down into individual steps, and that's and steps within steps within steps, they can't dance. You know, at some point they have to feel the music. And I think you know, that's why making these rubrics can be exhausting, because I think any activity is infinitely divisible.
I think, Paul, I'm just going to add, and I'm going to open it back up to everybody else. But one of the things that we always need to consider is matching exact the evaluation of the student work. So what that needs to look like in the rubric. And to your point, Paul and Jim, you know, and Dave, those analytical rubrics, they're not for every single assignment, every single product, every single evaluation, right? And do I unequivocally think that we need to be using rubrics for everything? Absolutely not. However, when we think about an overall product that requires students to engage in multiple facets of learning, that requires students to really interact with the content at a deeper knowledge, there's the justification for a rubric at that point. So, you know, for example, I often use a marketing brief as an authentic product. You know, in a basic marketing class, you have to learn how to create a marketing plan, let's say. And then within the marketing plan, there are specific components that a student must show that they know and can do, right? And within the marketing plan, you know, they've got to have all these components, or the marketing plan as a whole is not complete. And so we would use a rubric in that case to show, well, do you have your target market identified? And you know, et cetera, on down the line. And what does it look like when you do have the market identified? The other, and this is, I want to throw this out to all of you. I'm interested in your feedback on this. I've had this kind of conversation with teachers for the better part of 30 years now, and I'm wondering about the benefit regarding an analytical rubric and the proficiency levels. So if we think about that analytical rubric that I showed you with the Great American Chocolate Chip Cookie Test, and all of those components, so the chocolate chips, the size, you know, the texture, whatever. And then I broke it down, because so I had those components, I had 3 of them, the critical elements, and then I gave some proficiency levels: exemplary, proficient, not, you know, needs improvement, not evident. And I'm wondering, what's the benefit in sharing all of those proficiency levels with the students? Because I think that the benefit here is that we want them to strive for that exemplary, right?
I think a good thing about rubrics, just like you're saying, Lisa, that on the flip side, you know, what I was saying, that it's very organic and hard to make rubrics. On the flip side, having a well-defined rubric makes students feel that they were graded fairly if they understand the rubric. So if you communicate the rubric clearly to them, like I try to do on my own rubrics with steps and math problems, they know exactly leaving the room what their grade was on that problem. And I think that saves a lot of work on the back end and grade appeal. They know how they're being judged. And that's why we do need rubrics. So it's kind of like complicated. Rubrics are hard to make, that are really very effective, but then it's absolutely necessary to have them so a student feels psychologically okay with how they were graded, and understand how they were graded. Now, not giving them the grade, but having them understand their own grade. I think the rubric is important for that.
I always give the rubric out at the beginning, and you know, if you have any questions about the rubric, we can go over them. But I've had students come to me very angry with a grade on a project or something, and I'll say, oh, all right, let's pull out the rubric and see how you did, you know. And then, oh, gee, you had 14 spelling errors. Oh, gee, you know, you didn't have this information. And every case, they walk away, they're satisfied, they feel like it was fair. They still have the same grade, but now they know that, yeah, okay, you're right, I didn't do what was expected. So I like them for that reason. It's, you know, it's a way for students to to strive to get that highest grade if they want it, but also to realize that, okay, I don't have time to get it, but I'm not going to complain about my grade because I didn't do the work for it. So.
I think that speaks to a lot of different pieces. First of all, rubrics are their most powerful when they're put in the hands of the students early on. I 100% agree with you, Sharon. And it also speaks to self-directed learning. So in higher education, we're working with adult learners, and adult learners really need to be, in order to be successful, you need to be self-directed. And giving them that rubric in the very beginning and saying, this is your roadmap for success, right? And then along the way, pulling out that rubric and saying, remember, this part here that we're studying right now, that we're practicing right now, that's in this rubric that you're going to, that we're going to use to evaluate our work. And so using that rubric, right, Sharon, as something strategic, as that planning tool, that preparation guide for students is very, very powerful. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. I have a lot to share with you, ideas and different types of rubrics that you can easily create and make them more general. We'll talk about that in the next part, but super, super powerful when they're given right to students. I just want to go back for a moment. Again, I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts about the different proficiency levels. So is it, in your opinion, is it beneficial for the students to see this critical element and what this critical element looks like at proficient, exemplary, not evident? Do they really need to see those other steps? Or what do you think about just saying, you know what, here's exemplary, folks. This is what it looks like for exemplary.
I think it's helpful because you can show maybe some of the common pitfalls that they might fall into if they don't do what you want. So the rubrics play a very strong role in letting the students know what you want them to do. So it's good directions, just beyond steps.
Mark, I know you had your hand up before. Did you want to have a go?
I think the one thing I found that the rubrics do, they're accountable to both us as educators, but also to the students. When I went through the program during the summer to learn, it said you ask the question and you define what parts of the question you want. So to Sharon's point, if someone comes to you, you can point out, well, you had this, you were lacking on this, or you didn't have examples to point out on this. I think it's more direct, especially with online where we don't communicate.
In the same way, we don't communicate the same way. I would agree.
I can't see him on the screen, but he had a good point. They're not necessarily good for everything. Quantitative, it's pretty much straightforward. Qualitative, it allows you to be more definitive into the answer. That's what I've found.
And for those authentic products, and I'm not an accountant. Mark, do you teach accounting or what?
No, I'm teaching more intro to business. I'm doing some economics now, and some and I'm also doing ethics. So I'm kind of all over the place.
Yeah. So I remember a couple of years ago, I was working with an accounting professor. He was creating a course, an online course, and I was the instructional designer, and he was the subject matter expert. And he was struggling right from the beginning with objectives. He was struggling with, I would say to him, so at the end of the course, what do your students need to be able to do? What does it look like when they successfully complete the course? And his go-to response was, they need to be able to fill out the spreadsheet. That's what he would say to me. And I could, at first I was like, I need more from you, buddy. I need, and I was trying really, really hard. So the way that it broke through the glass ceiling for him was that when he said, I have this rubric I created, because he wanted his students to have this multi-step, and I don't remember the details, multi-step product at the end, an authentic assessment, essentially is what it was. And this assessment was made up of all of these different accounting forms, for lack of a better word, that the student needed to be able to show that they could do, that they understand they could do. And he had created this rubric, and the rubric itself was beautifully created. It was very, very clear. And so from that rubric, because that was the end result of the course, from that rubric, we were able to pull out his course objectives. just from looking at that rubric, because at the end, they needed to be able to do this. So we backwards designed from that rubric. That was a very powerful experience for me.
So you went top down versus bottom up.
Yeah, well, backwards design is, then that's what we use here as our principle and foundation for our course design at the college. Backwards design by nature starts with those objectives, right? So you start with the objectives. That's the end result. At the end of the course, the students must be able to know and do this. And that is communicated. The this and the do is all communicated via those course objectives. So if you backwards plan after that, you would go to the performance assessment, and then of course the rubric that would go along with that performance assessment. So in a sense, that's what he was doing naturally. Paul, do you want to add?
I just wanted to say, for the highest level, which is proficient, I think.
Or exemplary would be like.
Exemplary, yeah. Let's go all the way with exemplary. Yeah. I think students, when they're starting out and they're very young, they learn by mimicking us. They try to write the way we do at the board. They learn by example. Later on, they fill in the conceptual holes of why we had, let's say, mathematical notation that way. So I think it is a good example to share the rubric with students, but then show them an exemplary example of whatever it is that the task is at hand. I think that helps. That's all I wanted to add.
Agreed. Jim?
Yeah, I guess as this is wonderful, by the way, I just want to say this is great. That as I try to apply this to how I teach and correct assignments, that when people are creating programs, I'm more focused on that process rather than coming up in saying, okay, proficient, assigning these levels with these terms. So did the program compile, right? Which is like would it start, let alone do the correct behavior type of thing. And I do have a rubric. I usually do apply a rubric. My preference is to use is to not to put the rubric in the assignment. That I almost think the rubric takes away from the process. So to my students, I'm like, this is your requirements. Put on you are a software developer hat. This is your requirements. You have to translate this into a design and then code, right? And so by having that rubric, to me, I think it's distracting from the process. When I correct, I do apply a rubric, mostly because I never ever want to have a grade appeal, and if I do have one, I want to win. So I use the rubric, and I judge everyone equally. I judge everyone equally with that rubric. So in the rubric, it would be: did the code compile? Did you comment your code? And sure, I could have mapped these, and I could have put the words, expected, proficient, whatever the words would.
The proficiency levels,
Proficiency levels. I just don't do that. I just assign a point value.
And next week, I am going to share with you some varied rubric examples. Because yes, they can be very time consuming. If you're creating an analytical rubric for an end of the course authentic performance assessment that shows that the student really comprehensively understood, and there are huge takeaways, right? That's time consuming. If you're most often you see that end result, that authentic assessment result, has that analytical rubric. And I will share some of the analytical rubrics that I created in my last 10, 15, 20 years working online. And it's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling how anybody can see that as a useful tool. But at the same time, Jim, to your point, right, the inter-rater reliability piece is a huge factor that oftentimes goes unnoticed. So for example, inter-rater reliability, as we're talking about in our assessment committee, means that let's say we're all teaching the same group of courses, and we all have this common assessment that our students must complete at the end of the course. And so we all have the common assessment, and we all have the same rubric that we're using. So we want to make sure that we're all using the rubric the same way, that we're all reading that rubric the same way. And, you know, our own experiences, our own theory and philosophy determine how we read that rubric. It really does impact your thinking about what that critical element, that piece of the rubric really looks like. So that inter-rater reliability exercise is super, super important to make sure we're all not cookie cutter, but we're all closer. That we're, you know, when we see and use this rubric, we're looking at the same things. We're looking for the same things. But the other side of it really is that inter-rater reliability with ourselves. And so often, I tell you, I blame myself. I mean, I put myself on the spot all the time. And I tell you, if I'm in a good mood and I'm correcting, you're pretty much in a better shape than if I'm in a bad mood and I'm correcting. Do you know what I mean? I mean, we've all been there. I don't mind saying it, right? So, you know, that inter-rater reliability piece has to do with a group, but it also has to do with us. And when we're using that same rubric over and over again, right, Jim? We have a closer inter-rater reliability, you know, from ourselves. So I want to thank you all very much. We're just about at 1 o'clock. I have very much enjoyed this conversation, and I know that some of you haven't said anything, and please know that you always have the option of opening up your microphones and adding in your perspective. And on that note, before we end, does anybody else have any final comments to say before I share my screen once again and highlight some happenings from the Hub?
Yeah, I would say something based on my experience with the rubrics. I usually don't give rubrics for each assignment because it depends on the course and depends on the assignments. But it happens on time that the student, they came and complained about the grade, and I went through the rubrics. And then I explained her that you are missing this. But at the end, I asked her, what did you learn about this assignment? Because I wanted to, because I saw the student, they're focused mostly on a rubric, going by, so I made them miss this. But I noticed that some of them, they're missing the point. So they're not learning, so they're focused mostly like the grade, because when you said the rubric, they relate to the grade. So I'm meeting all the criteria the instructor has said for me. So I'm getting this grade. So, and I said, okay, tell me, what did you learn? And she said, oh, I just went through all the rubric that you assigned us. And so it's like they're missing the big picture, the picture that, so my purpose is not like focusing on rubrics. My purpose is that she has to learn some things. So, and then for some classes, I start avoiding the rubrics. I give a lot of comments, and I explicitly say them on assignment that you have the assignment should have this. If you miss that, and if they miss, because there are assignments that are mostly analytical, so they have to think and they have to go beyond. So like I ask them to go beyond the facts or analyze the facts. So it's kind of difficult for me even to use the rubrics when you have like explain the procedure. You say that, but there are some aspects of the procedure that not necessary. So I cannot go into steps, but you have to. Like my student, they have like in a law course, they have an assignment. I gave them an assignment, and they are overall, all of them were crazy about like, it's like a puzzle they couldn't like figure out. And I didn't want that they focus on a rubric, on the grade, on the points, but I wanted to focus to identify what's jurisdiction, what's with the court. So, and I left a comment and I told them, so go beyond that. I don't want that you focus on that. Focus. See the facts. What are the facts? Analyze the facts. So that's that. I am partially. I agree what Megan says a little bit and what Paul says about the rubric. So I have difficulties in that, but at the same time, I evaluate because there are students they go by that. They appreciate the feedback. They want the feedback for us. And I leave a lot of comments. They love the comment because I explain. I go in detail. If they miss something. Usually I ask questions. So if they miss something, because I want that they realize by themselves what is missing there. And if they cannot find, okay, then I give the explanation and I tell in details of what is missing.
This is a great segue because next week when we meet, we are going to talk a little bit more about the different types of rubrics. Because, you know, it's not a one size fits all. And I want to continue the conversation about the reason, the why behind the rubrics, and a little bit more about the philosophy as well. So I want to thank you very much for joining today and for sharing. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen once again with you. I'm going to move you over here. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Thank you so much, everybody.